the day. So we're going to dive into threat intelligence now. So what exactly is threat intelligence? So threat intelligence is the gathering of information, as much information as we can about threats and threat actors. And by gathering this information, we're going to be able to help ourselves mitigate the various risks that exist. So there are a lot of different threat intelligence sources out there, essentially places where we can go to get information. And we might be looking for technical information. We might be looking for operational information. We might be looking for strategic information. So when it comes to tactical information, this is really about the tools, features that are available to us that will help us identify what are called IOCs, so indicators of compromise, and then report back on those findings. So for example, we might have some systems and services set up so we can identify unusual outbound network traffic. We might have stuff in place to identify anomalies in privileged user account activity. We might have systems in place to detect geographical irregularities in our network traffic, or account login red flags, or increases in database read volumes, or abnormal HTML response sizes, or there might be a large number of requests for the exact same file. Mismatched port application traffic, suspicious registry changes and adjustments, unusual DNS requests, and the list goes on and on and on, as you can see. So a lot of information, and the gathering of that information, and then figuring out how we can actually implement those technical strategies to help us identify those indicators of compromise. Now, when it comes to operational, this is about having a better understanding of how threat actors behave. So what are their actual tactics? What are their actual techniques? What are their actual procedures? The better understanding you have of that side of things, the better you will be at protecting your environment and picking out those tactical forms of security that you will need in order to protect yourself. And then you have strategic. So strategic is about simply just staying up to date with the latest and greatest high-level information that you can. So, constantly checking out the news for cybersecurity incidents, or subscribing and participating in various threat intelligence feeds. All of those are going to be ways for you to have that strategic level you need. That'll help you out with the operational side of things. That'll also help you out with the tactical side of things. So when it comes to threat intelligence sources, let's begin by categorizing threat intelligence sources as either open source or closed source. So open source, folks, is anything that is publicly available. It may or may not require you to sign up or subscribe for anything. But the key here is that it is free and available to all. It might be information from some sort of security group on a social media platform. It could be information that is part of public records or news sources. It could be part of public threat maps and a whole lot more. So it is a good idea to subscribe to threat intelligence feeds to stay on top of things, and also to participate in threat intelligence feeds so that way there you can share information with others or learn from others. So that is one of the recommendations of CompTIA Security Plus, is to subscribe to those threat intelligence feeds to stay on top of things and participate with them. However, one of the important questions that you really need to get answered when it comes to open source options is, where is the information actually coming from? How vetted is this information? And how up to date is the actual collection of information? The last thing you want to do is subscribe to some sort of social media open source intelligence feed only to find out that it's a bunch of children in their parents' basement that are just taking whatever they can find and slapping it all together without knowing whether it's true or not. So it's important that you take the time to understand where this information is coming from. Now, a really great site that'll help you out with the operational side of things, which is about the tactics, techniques, and procedures, is attack.mitre.org. Now, maybe you've been here already, maybe you haven't been here already in your life, but what MITRE Attack does for us is they've put together a globally accessible knowledge base of adversary tactics and techniques based on real-world observations. And access to this is free. So let's go ahead and click on matrices, and you'll see they have matrices for enterprise, mobile, and industrial control systems. If we break out enterprise, you'll see there are different categories that you can dive into. But if we just take a look right here at the screen, we'll see that they lay out in their matrix. So the matrix is rather large, and if we scroll over here, and it constantly changes and evolves all the time based on new information, so it's pretty wide. If I scroll up, you'll see it goes all the way: impact, exfiltration, command and control, collection, lateral movement, discovery, credential access. We'll come back over this way, and we'll see here that we also have defense, evasion, privilege escalation, persistence, execution, initial access, resource development, and reconnaissance. So what these are tactics. These are tactics. And then they have the techniques listed. So for example, under reconnaissance, the tactic of reconnaissance, these are the techniques that cyber criminals are likely to use. Under execution tactics, these are the techniques they're likely to use. So for example, if we go under reconnaissance, fishing for information, if we click on that, we'll see that it'll tell us adversaries may send phishing messages to elicit sensitive information. So there's a description about what this is, phishing for information. And then there's some procedural examples they give you. There's mitigation information as well for you, as well as ways that you can detect it. So application logs, network traffic, so monitoring and analyzing network traffic patterns and packet inspection associated, monitoring network data for uncommon data flows. Then depending on the specific method of phishing, detection can vary. Monitor for suspicious email activity, and so on and so forth. So they do provide you with some helpful information that'll get you on the right track to protecting yourself. And then under, for example, something like persistence. Persistence, we have a technique of account manipulation. So adversaries may manipulate accounts to maintain access to victim systems. Account manipulation may consist of any action that preserves adversary access to a compromised account, such as modifying credentials or permission groups. So remember when we talked about advanced persistent threats, right? You need a way to ensure that you maintain connectivity, whether it's while the system's on or after the system's rebooted. And so account manipulation is one of the ways for them to establish the persistence that they are looking for. So then what are the different types of procedure examples that have happened in the real world? So what are some of the mitigations? Multi-factor authentication, network segmentation, operating system configuration, privileged account management, user account management. Then how can you detect? Monitor. So remember at the end of last session, when I asked if anybody had any questions, one of you had asked, well, how can we figure that out? How do we know? And I said, it's about monitoring. Well, same thing through here. How do you know if somebody's manipulated your account for persistent purposes? It comes down to actual monitoring. And then I'll come back here just one more time, but if we look any deeper, right, we can get more information like initial access. Again, phishing shows up here again under initial access. So what are they trying to do? They're trying to send phishing messages to gain access to your system. So here's some examples of that. So even though phishing's showing up multiple times, what it shows up under, the procedural examples and the mitigations for them might be different. So the mitigation under one tactic might be different than another tactic if that same technique shows up there. So just something for you to keep in mind. You won't be tested on the attack MITRE framework for the certification exam, but something for you that I want to give to you if you didn't already know about it, that you can use to further your education, further your knowledge using this open source intelligence, something that's publicly available. So that way there you have the ability to get a little more knowledge on tactics, techniques, and procedures. Attack MITRE framework can help you out with that. Now, closed source is about proprietary information. So information that is offered by various organizations throughout the world, and it may be free at first. So maybe they were offering a trial to this particular information, or maybe you get it free and you only get basic monitoring or basic information. But then if you pay a fee, you get more advanced threat intelligence database information. So things like Cisco Talos or Threat Connect, and there's a whole bunch of other ones out there. Again, not going to be tested on specific examples. But in the end, regardless of whether it's open source or closed source, you always have to remember that you have to be able to vet that information, trust that information. So a high profile organization, typically, who's been around a long time, who is very involved in security, is going to be more trustworthy than something that just pops up out of nowhere. So always keep that in mind. But over time, whoever just popped up out of nowhere could have actually become something that is trustworthy and so on and so forth. So just because in the beginning they may not have been trustworthy because you don't know who they are, eventually down the road they will be. So don't rule out things that maybe you've looked at in the past that now today might be a valid closed source intelligence offering you want, or an open source intelligence offering that you want. Now, let's get a little bit more specific here with things like vulnerability to databases. So vulnerabilities are what? Vulnerabilities are weaknesses in software that provide an attacker a means of entry. It could be a weakness in hardware that provides an attacker a means of entry. So because there are so many pieces of software and so many vulnerabilities, knowing what vulnerabilities exist in software and hardware and how to patch them is a challenge for each and every single one of us. And that is why vulnerability databases exist today. For example, the National Vulnerability Database, NVD, hosted at nvd.nist.gov, is a repository of vulnerabilities and related information such as security checklists, references, security-related software flaws, misconfigurations, product names, impact metrics, and so on and so forth. And the CVE is also another great one. So let's go ahead and take a peek at those today. So we'll come out here, we'll type in CVE database. So cve.mitre.org. So mitre.org has taken over the CVE database. They have. So, and they'll even tell you there's a new page that is available to that. But we're just going to show you quickly here that you can search the CVE list, for example, and maybe you're looking for issues related to Cisco. So we can go ahead and type that in, and we'll see that we have some CVEs here. So in this particular case, this CV guest can trigger NIC interface reset, a BORS crash via netback. It is possible, so on and so forth. Buffer overrun, buffer, right? Memory can be triggered in X509 certificate verification. Really? In X509 certificate verification, buffer overruns can occur. The Jenkins Cisco Spark plugin, and notice the date, 2022, 2022, 2022, 2022. Look at all of these in 2022. And like I said, it's hard to stay on top of things. It's hard to stay on track. That's why these databases exist for us. So even Microsoft, we did a search CVE list for, let's say, just Windows 10 as an example. So here's a bunch that are related to Windows 10 in some way, shape, or form. So there's the CVE database, there's the NVE database, whatever you choose to use, right? It's a way for you to have another source of information that's going to give you the opportunity to keep an eye on what? Specifically here, vulnerabilities. Vulnerabilities with software, vulnerabilities with very hardware manufacturers, so that way they can stay on top of things. Public-private information sharing centers. What is that all about? Well, for the certification exam, I want you to remember that if they're ever talking about threat intelligence, and they are giving you a scenario where there's commercial entities and government entities, they are trying to get you to pick an answer of public-private information sharing centers. So these public-private information sharing centers is all about facilitating the exchange of data between commercial and government entities. Now, if that's all you remember for the exam, perfect, you're all set, all right? But I'm going to go a little bit deeper here. So these public-private information sharing centers are made up of information sharing and analysis centers, information sharing and analysis centers, ISACs, as well as information sharing and analysis organizations, ISAOs. So information sharing and analysis centers and information sharing and analysis organizations. So the information sharing and analysis organizations essentially include any organization that is sharing cyber-related information for the purpose of enhancing all the other members that are involved in this public-private information sharing group. And then the ISACs are a special category of ISAOs, right? And so these ISACs are typically made up of privately run, government-approved, industry-based cybersecurity experts. So the ISAOs and the ISACs work on a very simple premise. Let's share everything that is happening with each other, and together we'll be able to learn from each other and we'll be able to help the industry out more. So this can definitely be super expensive to be involved in, especially ISACs, because analysts are not cheap. But if the costs are spread out amongst all the members, and there's a large number of members, then on a per member basis, the cost could be relatively cheap when it's all said and done. Right? And many of us are not going to be able to participate in some sort of public-private information sharing center. So there is a U.S. government approved option of that. It's called Infragrad. That's what it is. So up here, Infraguard, G-A-R-D. That's what it is. Infraguard. So Infraguard, and it's run by the FBI. All right. So it's run by the FBI, and it's run in a way that all the information is going to be shared. So anything that the FBI knows from a cybersecurity standpoint is going to be shared on Infraguard, and therefore it's a way for you to get information like a public-private information sharing center would, but in the end, it's going to be a lot cheaper for you because it is absolutely free. But what is the difference here? Timeliness. Because the FBI will never share any information for any type of ongoing investigation. So if there's any type of cyber activity that is happening and the FBI is doing an investigation on that, it's not going to be information that is readily available. Whereas if you're a part of an ISAC or an ISAO, then in the end, you would have that information already. And you'd be doing something about that. But because the FBI doesn't share information of ongoing investigations, you're not going to get the timeliness that you would have if you were a part of some sort of ISAC. ISO, right? But the price is right, it's free. So it's better than nothing. Keep that in mind. And in the dark web, some of you may be looking at this going, why does he have dark web written on the slide? Well, the dark web is bad, right? You should know that. The dark web is bad. If you didn't know that, it's bad. But it contains information that may be valuable to you as a security professional, and therefore is a valid threat intelligence source. So for example, with all the data breaches that happen, where does the data actually go? The data goes to the dark web. So if the data goes to the dark web, well then, if you browse the dark web for information about you and you discover it, that means at some point in time, somebody took information from you and put it on the dark web. So you can monitor the dark web to uncover potentially leaked credentials, which can help you identify a yet-to-be-known security breach. Now, I'm not saying that all of you should all go out tonight and jump on the dark web. That's not what I'm saying. No way, absolutely not, all right? But if you are a threat intelligence researcher, it is not a bad idea to become familiar with how to go through the dark web in a safe and secure way, so that way you're protected, number one. But number two, you could find out if any information about your organization or any other organization out there that you care about, and then you can notify them about that. Other sources of information include things like RFCs. So what are RFCs? Requests for comments. These are sets of standards used to define how networks and their various associated protocols are established and managed. So we have RFCs for pretty much everything that we deal with when it comes to our networks. And so RFCs are free, they're openly available. But what's great about RFCs is that they are not constantly evolving entities. When you think about a wiki is something that's constantly evolving, constantly changing, and sometimes a wiki could be changed without the information that's being put into it properly being vetted. But when it comes to RFCs, right, everything is fully formal and vetted and verified, and it's fixed in time when it is written, meaning that whatever's written in an RFC can't be changed down the road. If you do need to have changes to an RFC, those changes are documented, they are going to be formalized, they are going to be an update, but there is going to be a new RFC that is drafted and approved. So the original RFC stays, and then there's another RFC that's an addendum or addendum to that RFC. So they are absolutely useful sources for intelligence because they are trustworthy. They list details by which protocols operate, and in some cases, right, there's details about those protocols and services in those RFCs that are not widely used or not widely deployed or not widely available, but maybe cyber criminals have found a way to use that aspect of whatever it is to infiltrate us. So RFCs are not a bad place to get information that you need about something very specific, especially when it comes to anything security specific related. Vendor websites. When we think about software, hardware, and services that you are using from a vendor, you want to stay in the loop on that software, hardware, service, whatever it happens to be. And a good place to start is right on their website. And a great vendor would have you on a mailing list to keep you updated and in the loop when it comes to safety, security, in relation to their software, their hardware, and their various services. Various industry groups. Remember that cybersecurity revolves around what? The sharing of information between trusted parties. So joining and being active in a local industry group is a good way to get practical information concerning threats, threat actors, and more importantly, what can be done to defend your networks based on what others have already done. In addition, since they are a trusted source of information, you are able to get the answers you need to all of your questions because someone in your group has more than likely experienced something that you are trying to do. And if not, you can work together to solve whatever it is you are trying to solve. Conferences and journals from an academic standpoint are good, right? Like a conference, for example, can be fun. But by the time you get there and watch the presentation, it is old news. Why is it old news? Because anytime a conference is set up, right, you have to go through the process of creating whatever it is you want to present. You have to go ahead and get it reviewed. You have to go ahead and make sure it's relevant for the situation. And then you go and present at this conference. But when you present it, you're presenting something that has already happened. Something from the past. So conferences are a great place to what? To get more education, to remind yourself of things, to network with other people, and maybe, get to know some people in the industry that can help you from a security standpoint. Journals are pretty much gonna be outdated as soon as you get your hands on them. Because by the time the peer review is done and all the I's and T's are crossed in regards to this academic journal, it's old news, but it's always still worth reading because you might pick up little tidbits or nuggets of information that you didn't know before. And then threat and vulnerability feeds. It is highly recommended, as I said, by CompTIA Security Plus to subscribe to threat intelligence feeds to stay on top of things and participate in threat intelligence information sharing with others because it's a great way to stay in the loop. But always remember that you have to ensure that you understand where that information is coming from, how it's been vetted, how it applies to your industry. Those are all important elements of those particular threads and feeds. All right, so now we have to consider the fact that security and the way we communicate cybersecurity information today is different than it was 20 years ago. It's different than it was 30 years ago and 40 years ago, right? We didn't have the need to share cybersecurity information like we used to, right? Or we didn't have the need back then to share cybersecurity information like we need to today. But more importantly, we need a way to share cybersecurity information so that way there, no matter who is using it or what is using it or why it's being used, right, it's standardized. Like everything else in this world, we need a way to standardize stuff when all of a sudden becomes super important, super popular, and the entire world is going to be using it. So, like all other types of information in this world, we need a structured way of representing our cybersecurity information, and also a standard way of exchanging it. So, with the advancement of cybersecurity and the need to share information, STIX and TAXII were introduced, initiated, created originally by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, and that was about 2012. And now, though, STIX and TAXII are governed by the international consensus body called OASIS. So OASIS, OASIS. So STIX is what? STIX is a standardized way of representing our information. So how do you represent, for example, the command and control IP addresses if you're sharing that information with somebody? How do you present those indicators of compromised? How do you detail them? How do you note them? How do you record them? Right? Same thing with reputation scores, and the list goes on in regards to, what are we going to have to represent and standardize. And then TAXII is about the protocols that are going to be used to exchange the information. So TAXII is a protocol used to exchange STIX formatted data using HTTPS, and it can be both a push and pull scenario. So here's an example of STIX. You're not going to have to worry about the formatting for the exam, but just remember that STIX is referring to the standardized way of formatting that data. So we call it a data structure. We call it a schema. Defines how the data will be structured, represented, and formatted. So as you can see, it's in JSON formatting here. If you didn't know that, that's okay. You're not going to have to recall that on the exam. But we have key value pairs that are inside our curly braces. We have commas to separate out our different key value pairs. But you'll see here, we got type. And then you've got ID. And then you got the version. And you got when it was created, when it was modified. You have name. You have a description. So this formatting is going to make sure that regardless of what it is, right, we all represent that information the same way. Now, are all the values needed? For example, is it necessary maybe to provide as a description? Well, it depends on the situation, depends on the scenario. But now what that does, it allows you to get the information downloaded from some database and then use that information regardless of the software program that's being utilized. Because every single software program out there would be designed to be able to read and interpret this information in this type of format and then generate whatever you need for what it is you're doing at that point in time. So let's say you're running a vulnerability scan and so on and so forth, and then you had to access information in a vulnerability database. Well, that information in the vulnerability database would be following the STIX structure and formatting, so that way there, no matter what application or service you're using for that vulnerability scan, it understands what that information is in it. That's the idea behind STIX. And then TAXII, as I said, is the actual transport protocol. So TAXII is a transport protocol to move our STIX formatted data from one device to another device. So you'll have, for example, a TAXII server hosting that information in a database, and then you have your TAXII client downloading that information. So request response. And then, as we said here, the client can publish information to a server as well. So push it to a server. So the TAXII server can push to clients. We can pull. All different options that we have with TAXII. So just remember, when it comes to STIX and TAXII for the exam, what they are. You don't have to be an expert in these, but this is your most important page here. STIX, standardized way of representing threat intelligence information, and TAXII is the protocol used for exchanging. Your organization has recently uncovered unauthorized access to various systems. You are concerned that data may have been leaked. What would be the best way to identify if data has been leaked? A, B, C, or D, folks. Chat in your answer. Yeah, the stick server is not going to be able to tell me if my data has been leaked, right? If you understand what sticks is, you know sticks is not the answer. By accessing open source intelligent feed. So, would an open source intelligent feed help me identify if data has been leaked? You know, I could, right? There could be a possibility there, right? If that news or information gets out, then there might be some sort of threat intelligence feed out there, open source intelligence feed, I should say, that has posted information about my organization being compromised. Right? Visiting a CV database, absolutely not. That's not going to help me. Exploring the dark web, it would. Okay, so I'm down to these two here, B and C. B and C. Right? What I want to know is that I want to identify if data has been leaked. Has been leaked. And if we look at the timeline here, it says your organization has recently uncovered unauthorized access to various systems. You're concerned that data may have been leaked. What would be the best way to identify if data has been leaked? Well, the best way wouldn't be open source intelligence feeds. Right? The best place would be for me to go to the dark web and take a browse around based on these answer options. So absolutely C would be the best answer for the certification exam. And if any open source intelligence feed ever posted that I had a data leak, they would have gotten that information from where? They would have gotten that information from the dark web themselves, wouldn't they have? Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, so C is the best of the four options when it's all said and done. Because that's where my data is going to be placed if it's been leaked. Not on the open source feed.